The Center for Immigration Policy Reform, a non-profit organization advocating for changes to Canada's immigration policies, says the country is letting in too many newcomers. The group argues that those new to Canada pay less in taxes than they cost in taxpayer-funded services. However, critics of that position argue the value of a new Canadian is more than monetary. Does Canada need to scale back immigration levels? And at what point are those levels sustainable? And joining us this evening, Raj Sharma, an immigration lawyer with Stuart Sharma Harshani. And on the phone from Vancouver, Martin Collacott, chairman of the advisory board for the Center for Immigration Policy Reform. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to you both.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Martin, I'd like to start with you. In reviewing immigration policy performance for 2013, your organization credits the federal government with making some significant improvements, but on the flip side says Canada is still letting in too many immigrants. How so?
Basically for this reason. There are a lot of Canadians unemployed, whether it's young people, whether it's Aboriginals, people laid off from the manufacturing sector, recent immigrants. We are not making full use of our existing human resources, but we're bringing in what amounts to probably the highest per capita immigration levels in the world, and a lot of temporary foreign workers on top of that. And Canadians, while the economy does get larger because of the immigrants coming in, the population gets larger, there is no per capita GDP benefit. Canadians don't benefit from this larger economy. So we should be concentrating on training, getting more Canadians into the workforce, and use immigration. We're not against immigration, but it should complement, it shouldn't replace best use of our existing human resources.
Martin, are there, though, the Canadians to fill those vacant positions, especially here in Alberta?
No, it's a challenge, and Canada has to do a number of things. We've got to encourage more people to take training. We've got to have a program of apprenticeships, because one of the things that Alberta has a problem with is trained tradesmen. And so we've got to sort out a number of problems, but we're not doing that. Jason Kenney, as employment minister, his new portfolio, is starting to work on some of these things. But we shouldn't continue to make it easy just to bring in very large numbers of people overseas rather than try to plan to make better use of Canadians. We'll still want some immigration, but we don't need anywhere near the current numbers if we made better use of the people already in the country.
Raj, how much of an argument do you see here for scaling back on the number of newcomers we're welcoming into Canada?
Well, I don't take any position with Martin's point that immigration has to work both, obviously, for the immigrant or prospective immigrant, but also for Canadians. That being said, the person who advances an argument kind of bears the onus of establishing or proving his argument. And in this case, the Center for Immigration Reform has put out this bold statement that we're taking in too many immigrants, but it doesn't actually put or posit any contrary number. So we don't actually know what their position is. We're just taking in too many immigrants, period, and the number should be lower. So it's kind of hard to argue, or kind of difficult to take a position on that kind of vague statement.
Martin, how much of a fiscal burden
well,
on Canadian
taxpayers
is immigration?
The analysis by the Fraser Institute shows that because recent immigrants have not, on average, some have done very well, but on average they've earned much less than earlier immigrants or Canadians. It costs Canadian taxpayers about $23 billion a year in terms of the benefits they get over what they pay in taxes. Now, the government has taken measures to try and improve the selection of permanent residents, so they'll be more successful and earn more money. So that might be rectified to some extent. But the overriding question is, why do we need to bring in such large numbers? And the Bank of Montreal and the Toronto Dominion Bank both issued studies in the past year saying that there are no overriding shortages of labor that the private sector keeps claiming there is. that there are shortages in specific sectors, but these shortages could be met by normal market forces. There's a shortage of labor, wages go up, more Canadians get training, and the shortages are filled. And they said the shortages are no more severe than they were 16 years ago or 15 years ago, and they're not going to be any more severe in the future.
Raj, how much of a balance has yet to be struck by the federal government in terms of protecting taxpayers when it comes to immigration costs?
Michael, if I can go back and address one of the premises of Martin's argument is that there's this fiscal transfer from Canadians to new immigrants of about $23 billion a year. I believe that Martin is relying on the paper by Professor Grubel, and that paper has been reviewed by Javdani and Pendekar. And that figure of $23 billion, or approximately $6,000 per immigrant, that's been whittled down to about a couple $100 per immigrant. So instead of $23 billion, there's economists from Simon Fraser University that peg the number more like $2 billion. So I would have to take issue with Martin's argument because it's predicated on perhaps a flawed premise.
Well, could I just comment quickly on that? Raj is quite correct about this being challenged by the two economists from Simon Fraser. Herbert Grubel and Patrick Grady then reviewed all the data that the other two had presented and came back and showed that their criticisms weren't valid. This was a paper that came out about 10 months after the two Simon Fraser. So those figures, the latest figures of $23 billion, haven't been challenged by anyone.
But still, that's a big difference between a couple billion and $23 billion.
Well, I can tell you why, why there was a difference. The two, Pendekar and I forget the name of the other gentleman, went back to immigrants who came in as early as the early 1970s when immigrants were doing well. Those that came in after 1980 have not been doing well, which is the period encompassed by the Grubel-Grady study. And also, there was an issue over what constitutes public goods, whether things like national defense, policing, and so on should be factored into this. And I think the Grubel-Grady second round pretty well contradicted what Pendekar and his colleague had said.
Raj, did you have a follow to that?
I guess, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. So ultimately, I guess my concern is this, is that Canadian immigration policy and the numbers of immigrants that we should be accepting should be set by accountable, elected representatives of the people. And they shouldn't be set necessarily by think tank individuals or individuals of a particular ideology. And I appreciate that Martin's been doing this for a very long time. I have a great deal of respect for him, and kudos, of course, to him for bringing more. Immigration debate has always been a lot more heat than light. But at the same time, I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with accountable, elected representatives setting our immigration policy and deciding in terms of numbers. I mean, let's face it, in terms of statistics or these studies, it depends on what you measure. And there's always going to be a decision by the particular individual or the researcher or the author as to what to study and what to quantify and what not to quantify. And the reality is that individuals and immigrants are more than just integers on a balance sheet. There's a lot of factors that can't be quantified. Now, for example, immigrants' impact on the housing market. Now, that may or may not be a benefit to Canadians, but again, it's difficult to quantify, and that's why it's not in those particular those papers. So we have to take, I think, those papers with a grain of salt.
Martin, what is then
a
sustainable level of immigration, and how do you determine that?
Raj is perfectly correct that it's the elected officials who have got to decide on numbers and immigration policy. The fact is, though, that none of the political parties from right to left are dealing with some of the major issues of concern to Canadians. And what's happened in Europe is you've got anti-immigration parties resulting because the mainstream parties haven't been dealing with these issues. We don't want to see that happen in Canada. We need a national debate. A lot of very few Canadians are against immigration, and they'll always say, "Oh, it's a good thing." But when you scratch deeply, you find that they have a lot of reservations about the numbers of people coming in, the impact on the economy, and I want to see a debate take place rather than having anti-immigrant part. My parents are immigrants. My wife's an immigrant from Asia, and I want to see us remain an open and welcoming country. But I don't think we're heading that way unless we have a serious, open, and informed national debate on these issues.
Raj, do you agree? Is this how many Canadians feel?
I think I have to agree with Martin's point. The reality is that whenever you start talking about immigration, there's always these labels of xenophobia or racism that's thrown about, and that doesn't add anything to the debate. And I would have to agree. Having discourse and debate about this very, very important issue that affects all Canadians is important. And there's the elephant in the room has to be eventually tackled at some point or another.
Well, Martin, what then is the biggest change that you would like to see in immigration policy moving forward?
Well, I'd like to see a review of levels and based on a long-term national strategy for getting more Canadians into the workforce. And only then look at complementing it with immigration. We didn't talk about temporary foreign workers, incidentally, which is another huge problem. I said back when the program was enlarged in 2006 that this was a mistake, that you're going to raise all sorts of problems. Interestingly, the left of the political spectrum is critical of temporary foreign worker program, I think for very good reasons, but they're supportive of high immigration levels for very bad reasons, because the regular immigration has a lot of the same impact on the workforce and Canadians that temporary foreign workers do. So we need an informed national debate. Our group, the Centre for Immigration Policy Reform, has been trying to get out some of the information that's relevant and look at the basic issues, and we'll continue to do that. We need support from the public if they're concerned about these issues. Our website is immigrationreform.ca in case anyone wants to know what we stand for.
Well, Raj, is there that appetite out there to conduct this debate?
Well, I think that the debate has been going on, and in fact, I think the former Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, Jason Kenney, has taken several pages from Martin's book, or various books on the issue of immigration reform. Jason Kenney attempted to implement a just-in-time immigration policy. He suspended the parent and grandparent class, family class sponsorship. We've done massive refugee reform, instituting disincentives in the form of limiting benefits and work permits for claimants from certain countries. So there's been a sea change in immigration in policy, especially in the last few years. So, clearly, Martin may be preaching to the choir in terms of this particular government.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but appreciate your insight this evening. Thank you kindly. That's Raj Sharma, an immigration lawyer in Calgary, and in Vancouver tonight, Martin Collacott, who chairs the advisory board for the Centre for Immigration Policy Reform.